Matthew George, Secretary of the MTCES, Shri Burgess, Treasurer, Reverend Philemon Koshi, who prayed for us this morning, my dear members of the faculty, friends, I hope that covers everyone. It's a delight to be with you all today. I'm sorry it's going to be a fairly brief appearance, but I hope to give you some thoughts that may be of some use as you proceed on your retreat. A retreat is a very curious word, isn't it? Because in many ways, what you are actually doing is not retreating, but advancing through your faculty improvement program. But the idea of a retreat is to retreat from your daily functions, your daily responsibilities, the chores of everyday work, into a context where you can reflect on broader issues and broader capacities. And that is therefore why your retreat leads to faculty improvement, because it's an opportunity for you to reflect beyond your daily responsibilities. I thought that perhaps the most useful thing I could do in the limited time I have is to raise two particular issues which I'm sure has come across your attention as teachers in our systems of education here in Kerala. The first, to my mind, was a challenge that was posed to all of us, and certainly to all of you, by the onset of the COVID pandemic. When suddenly there was a lockdown, classes couldn't be held, we couldn't go on forever without education, and so we turned to digital learning, online classes. And the frustrations and challenges that produced have been amply, but perhaps not enough, studied and documented. The first challenge was, of course, that of the digital divide. Perhaps in your classrooms, everybody could afford to access the internet. That was not true in our public school system. That was not true in our government schools across even Kerala. And even in some private or aided schools, there were rather serious challenges where some students, scholarship students and others, were unable to cope with the technological requirements of staying connected through online classes. I think many of us are familiar with the very tragic story that we all read in the papers in the course of 2020, when a Dalit girl, whose father was a daily wage laborer and who had stood first in her class throughout up to class 10, suddenly found herself needing to have online instruction. She had no mobile phone in the family. There was no internet connection, needless to say. And when many of us pointed this out to the state government, and the government added the so-called Victor's channel on television to teach the same online classes on TV, the problem was this girl's father was a daily wage laborer. There was no daily wage labor during the pandemic lockdown, so there was no income coming in. There was not even money to put food on the table. Well, how could they repair their one broken down television set? And so this poor girl, who had been a brilliant student throughout, watching all her more well-off classmates succeeding in keeping up with the course requirements, doing their classes online, managed sadly to feel such despair that she committed suicide. And this was front page news in Kerala at the time. We were all deeply shocked and wounded by this tragedy. And it was a reminder of how difficult the digital divide still is. Many of us then tried, I as MP started a drive to collect contributions of mobile phones to give below the poverty line children in my constituency. Other MPs and MLAs did something similar, but this tragedy could and should have been averted with more anticipation of the nature of the kind of problems that going online abruptly would cause. So the digital divide was one aspect of the problem, but it was not the only aspect. Even where children could be connected online through the internet, there were two difficulties, one for the teachers and one for the students. For the teachers, there was the challenge of adapting to a new form of instruction. Many of you are familiar with online work and computers, some of you are not. And navigating new technologies with no preparation, no training, and no phasing in must have been a huge challenge for many of you. For the students, just paying attention to a screen all day long is not easy. We assume that this generation is so used to staring at their mobile phones all the time that taking online classes would be a breeze. But studies around the world demonstrated that is not true, that they genuinely ended up with deficiencies in learning because of the challenges of having a proper attention span, focus time after time in the class. The teachers couldn't make eye contact with their students. They couldn't tell if the students were responding or understanding or listening. The students had distractions at home. There may be siblings running around. There may be parents calling them for something. There may be noise or other disturbances. The classroom atmosphere is absent. And so, in many ways, the experience of online classes can only at best be termed a partial success and at worst can be termed a failure. Very many studies conducted around the world, and I don't know if there was one in India, but there certainly I've seen some international studies after 1.5 years of the COVID pandemic. They all concluded that every student had been set back in their studies because of the pandemic. That no student was able to actually master what they would have done in the course of the academic year in a normal classroom. Now, there are many lessons to learn from this now that the pandemic is mercifully behind us, or so we all hope and pray, and we are now able to look at normal schooling once again. But I'm not sure we're learning the right lessons. One of the lessons our central government seems to have learned is to reduce the workload for subsequent classes by actually deleting essential subjects from the curriculum. That's not the way forward, very clearly, because you're going to be producing then undercooked students when they graduate from the school system, unready to cope with others who have had the full education. I think what we need to do is make remedial attempts to help students catch up with what they have missed and to give them that extra time and attention to be able to take it forward. But the one principal lesson that I derive from this entire experience is that despite all the hype we have seen about educational technology, massive online courses, MOOCs as they're called, or other kinds of online instruction and internet learning, including the much touted Byju's and other kinds of online courses, is that none of them can be a substitute for a teacher. They can at best be complementary, added on to your good work, in a sense that some students after your classes might take extra tuition from some teachers. You can assume that online courses can serve the purposes of that extra tuition. But you in the classroom remain indispensable. And if that is a reassuring signal for you, so much the better, but it's also a greater burden for you. Because now not only, as I think Mr. Matthew George pointed out, not only are you conventionally teaching, but you are teaching children who have also acquired the habit of picking up little bits of information online and on the internet, not all of which may be in accordance with what you're teaching, and not all of which may be congruent with the kinds of instruction you wish to impart. So you do need to be on your toes. You do need to keep involving them. But that brings me to my second major point. And my second major point is for all of you to be aware, increasingly conscious of the world into which you are releasing your students in the years ahead. The 21st century has made it very clear that methods of education and teaching, which in my view were already out of date when I was a student half a century ago, are even more irrelevant today. I've said this before, not in this school, so I will say it again. I believe the most important thing I can tell all of you teachers is, do not teach your children what to think, teach them how to think. And the reason I say this is that the approach of teaching children in the old way, where you teach them the textbook, make them listen to your lectures, take notes, and listen to what the book says, and read what the book says, learn it all up, memorize it very often, and then regurgitate it in the examinations. That was, as I said, arguably out of date half a century ago. It is simply no longer relevant in a world of high technology and rapid advances, where the textbook is out of date before it is printed, and where the world into which these children are going to be going is not a world where a well-filled mind is of very much use. Our old approach used to be to fill the minds of children with facts, with dates, with theorems, with formulae. I'm sorry to say that there is nothing that a child loses if they haven't memorized all of the stuff that we've used to getting them to memorize, because in the real world, they can find out anything they don't remember with 2 clicks of a mouse on Google. What we need to give them is not a well-filled mind, but a well-formed mind. What is a well-formed mind? A well-formed mind is that mind that has learned how to think, not been told what to think. It's a mind that is able not just to answer the questions that you're setting in the examinations and tests, not just to answer the questions, but to question the answers. A mind that has learned to think out of the box. A mind that is able to take unfamiliar information, news, propositions, inventions, innovations, which they have never heard of before, and still be equipped to approach this unfamiliar information and to make sense of it and find a pathway through it in the future. Why do I say this? Because there's been an Oxford Martin study a couple of years ago, Martin School, which says that 30% of the jobs in the world in 2030 is only 7 years away, 30% of the jobs in the world in 2030 will be jobs that do not exist today. How are you going to teach your children to be ready for a job that does not exist today? Not by telling them what to think. What you can teach them will already be out of date, as artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, all of this, voice recognition software, all of this is just galloping ahead at speeds that the world itself is being caught unawares by. All you can do is teach them habits of thought that will stand them in good stead when they deal with what they have never seen before or heard before. Certainly far more than they've ever seen in their textbooks or even prepared for their examinations. I think it was Einstein who said famously that the mark of true education is what is left behind in your head when you have forgotten everything you studied for your examinations. And I find that a very useful mark because many of us, I'm sorry to say, I was inconveniently good at taking examinations. I came first in everything throughout. But the problem is it was very short-term memory. I would study for the examinations, produce on the exam results what my teachers expected or the examiners outside expected, and probably forget most of the things, except what really interested me, which was history and literature, for which I read well beyond the classroom. You must understand that that's no longer relevant. When Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, drop out of university and found world-beating companies with new innovations, they're looking for people, as they said, who do out-of-the-box thinking. That is, who think outside the conventional wisdom. What is the box? The box is where everything is already known and stored. Those teachers who say to students who ask too many impertinent questions, stop asking questions, it's in the book, just study that. Those teachers are wrong. And I can tell you that right now. What you need is more impertinence. You need students who ask you not just why, but why not? Why can't it be like this? Why doesn't the sun rise in the west? Why must water freeze at a certain temperature? Why do we not see stars on certain nights and do on others? Whatever it may be. The kind of questions children often innocently ask their parents, do not demean those. Try and explain to them certain laws of nature, of physics, of chemistry, of mathematics. But at the same time, accept the possibility that some things may simply reflect habits of mind that can change. I mean, one example that I've often given children, but I'll give the teachers as well, is a simple example that I happen to be wearing right now. I need glasses only for a distance. I don't need glasses to look at the names on the program sheet in front of me. I don't need glasses to recognize most of you in the first 5 or 10 rows. But if I had to read the names on the board at the back of the wall, I would need glasses. So 5% of the day, maybe I need to wear glasses. The other 95%, I don't wear them. And because glasses are uncomfortable, sitting on the nose and hanging on the ears, I would usually say I wouldn't bother to wear them, except when I needed them. And then I would put them in a pocket and perhaps bang into a wall in a rush and they would break. Or especially in the days when I used to wear a munda all the time, there's no pockets. I would put the glasses on my lap, stand up when somebody comes in, the glass falls to the ground, somebody steps on it, it breaks. I can tell you there was one year where in the first 3 months of the year, I either lost or broke 6 pairs of glasses. So I was complaining to a friend and he was saying, so what is the problem here? And I said, the problem is very simple. For 150 years, glasses have been made to sit on your nose and hang over your ears. And I find that uncomfortable, so I don't like wearing them. I only wear them when I need to, and the rest of the time, I don't know where I put them and what happens to them. He said, you're right, for 150 years, they made glasses only one way. Let's see, let's find out if anyone has thought outside the box. And he went around, made inquiries, and 2 or 3 weeks later, he returned with what I'm wearing now around my neck. It sits around my neck. I simply don't need to look for a pocket or a table or remember where I put it or put it on my lap or drop it. It's there all the time. And if I'm leading my normal life and talking to you all, I don't need it. But if I want to read that board, it's all I need to do is it clicks together with two magnets in the middle. I can read those names. And when I've done that, I can click it down again and my glasses are still there. A very simple answer to the question, why must something be like that? If you say to somebody, draw a pair of glasses, they would draw your glasses, which are linked in the bridge over your nose, which are hanging over your ears with a loop. That's a standard image everyone has of glasses. Of course, in the 19th century, they also had the monocles, but that's not there anymore. What are we going to do now? Now we can say it doesn't have to be that way. It can also be this way. Tomorrow, maybe somebody will think of something even more innovative. But the point is that that kind of spirit of thinking beyond the conventional wisdom is what you need to encourage in your classroom. And I keep saying to Indian teachers, I know you're overburdened. I know you have too many students in the class. You have a heavy curriculum to get through. But try and make time for creativity. Try and make time where you get children to think for themselves. Do not teach mathematics by only teaching formulae that they must memorize and apply mechanically. Tell them stories in which mathematical formulae need to be devised. Give them challenges where the challenge obliges them to even think through which formulae need to be applied to solve a particular problem. Teach them history, perhaps. I know that it gets controversial in northern India, but we have more courage here. Teach them history and get two students to debate a particular historical episode. Tell them what side to take if you want, and then make sure they debate it with all the points of view on both sides of the argument. When you're teaching literature, ask a student to present their reaction to a particular story or a play by Shakespeare or a verse or whatever you're teaching. Get the students engaged, get them to think for themselves. Do not let them be machines to repeat and regurgitate what you've already taught them. It is only by encouraging this kind of initiative that we're going to produce children who are prepared for the world of the 21st century, the third decade of the 21st century, a world in which literally everything they've learned may be out of date by the time they've left school, where the jobs they were thinking of preparing for might be irrelevant. I'm running out of time, but I will say one more thing. I've often, when I've addressed technical IT groups and tech groups, told them the story of the whole business of medical transcription. Medical transcription is an industry which for around the first few years of the 21st century was considered a big sunrise industry. You know what medical transcription was? An American doctor would see his patients during the day. And in the pre-internet era, he would then have to dictate his notes to a secretary, pay her overtime. She would type it up. She was not very well educated. There would be mistakes. He'd have to correct them, find some time away from his patients to correct the things, give them back to her. She would retype them again. Sometimes there'd be mistakes in the second retyping, maybe because of his medical doctor's handwriting. Then she would need overtime pay. She would need annual leave. She would need health insurance. It was an expensive and complicated proposition, just keeping patient files up to date. But once the internet came, and in the late 90s, all the fiber optic cables were laid to places like India, medical transcription was born. The American doctor would dictate his notes into a computer. It would be zinged over the internet. When he went to sleep in America, some Indian with some medical education would wake up in the morning, type up his notes for him, zing it back at the end of his working day in India. The American doctor would come to work in the morning, all his notes already ready, no overtime, no annual leave, much lower charge by the Indians than there was for his secretary, and his work was done and he would be able to have his files up to date. It was a wonderful business. India thought of it first, and the result was that Indians monopolized the market. 95% of the world's medical transcription business was in India. And what happened with that was all these young, bright techies with some paramedical training were flocking to this. There were a number of companies mushrooming across India just to do medical transcription. People were coming and thinking they were set for life. They were taking house loans and car loans, thinking they had this job for a long time. It didn't last. Why? Again, the answer lies in technology. Just as the job had been created by technology, by fiber optic cables, by the internet, the jobs were destroyed by technology with the invention of voice recognition software. What happened now is that a doctor, for the price of one software, not paying regularly to some Indian company, for one software he could buy in America, he could just speak into his computer and he could see his own words appearing on the screen as he spoke, correct them on the spot if necessary. His notes were done much faster than even the Indian students could do it. No mistakes because he himself was talking into the machine and his files are perfect. End of story. The bottom dropped out of the medical transcription market and a lot of Indians with great hopes lost their jobs. So if a job that looked new in 2001, even up to 2005, suddenly ceased to be relevant by 2010, that's the world into which your children are graduating. They may think they have opportunities. There was a time when America had a major shortage of radiologists. So Indian radiologists were reading MRIs taken in American hospitals. They would zing it over. The Indian radiologist would do the interpretation of the MRI, send it back. Of course, the Indian radiologist is not licensed to practice in America. So they would do 95% of the work. The final signing off would be by a radiologist in America. But that again seemed to be a wonderful growth industry. Again, didn't last. Why? Artificial intelligence can read the MRIs now. So artificial intelligence is reading the MRIs and they're no longer sending them to radiologists in India. So we have to understand, whatever we can do, somebody will think of a way that a technology can do it faster than us. So we have to be constantly on our toes, providing services, providing a human touch that machines cannot, that software cannot. I often joke that Kerala will be okay because Ayurvedic massages cannot be produced by artificial intelligence. But I was only joking, and even then I might be wrong, because the robotics is advancing so much, maybe they'll get a robot to do a far better massage than a human being can. Anything can happen today. So there are changes, be prepared for them. And therefore, I end again with that simple message: do not teach your children what to think, teach them how to think, because that's what they're going to have to rely upon when they enter the real world of the 21st century. So those are the thoughts I want to leave you with for your weekend retreat. Go ahead and do your very best. And again, congratulations to the Thomas institutions for having taken the trouble to get faculty together on a retreat. One of the complaints I used to hear a lot when I was in the Ministry of Education, I was minister, as you know, for a very short while, a year and a half at the beginning of the previous decade. And at that time, one of the complaints I often used to hear is that many people, and they were talking particularly, of course, about the government system, became teachers and then got no remedial training, no improvements, no opportunities to study anything more till they retired. And that was terrible, and we wanted to encourage more mid-course training, more remedial instruction, more opportunities for advancement. I'm very glad that this wonderful Church Educational Society has thought of the importance of getting teachers away from the hurly-burly of daily life to reflect, think, and plan for the future. I congratulate the Thomas Educational Society for doing that, and I congratulate all of you for participating in this venture. Good luck, all the very best. Jai Hind.